Paloma was the daughter of one of the wealthiest men in the country, David Cervantes. She had recently turned 16 and was attending an elite business school. Paloma had everything: fashionable designer clothes, stylish branded shoes, expensive accessories. She got whatever she wanted, attended the best events in the city, flew abroad on weekends. The girl had many friends who admired her, and if anyone dared to say a word against her, they were immediately removed from her circle. The fate of these kids was pitiful. They had to sit in the far corner of the school cafeteria and socialize with those whom Paloma considered outcasts. Paloma's best friend was Selena, with whom she was almost inseparable. The girls sat at the same desk, laughed together at classmates and even teachers. Their fathers were also friends and loyal business partners. Once Selena went on vacation to the islands with her parents for a week, and when she returned, she failed a math test. The teacher allowed her to retake it after classes, and Paloma decided to wait for her friend in the school hallway to go shopping together later. To pass the time, she climbed onto the windowsill with her legs, took out a bag of chips from her backpack, and began to loudly crunch on them. The girl was listening to music on big pink headphones, so she didn't hear when a young, handsome guy in a janitor's uniform appeared in the hallway. He held a mop and a bucket of water and was about to clean the floor. Seeing the girl with chips, the guy frowned. He had just cleaned the windows of dust. Coming closer, the young man put the bucket on the floor, leaned the mop against the wall, and politely addressed Paloma. "Sorry, could you get off the windowsill and pick up the chips? You're making a mess on the floor." Paloma startled and took off her headphones. "Did you say something?" she asked. The guy patiently repeated his request. Paloma smirked. "Who are you to tell me what to do?" "Just a lowly servant," she arrogantly declared, looking down at the young man. Then she put her headphones back on and added, "I'll sit where I want." The young man was momentarily stunned, then turned and left the hallway, leaving the mop and bucket of water behind. Paloma didn't pay attention to it. Soon Selena came, who successfully retook the test, and Paloma completely forgot about the janitor. Leaving the chip bag on the windowsill, the girl jumped to the floor, grabbed her backpack, and she and Selena, laughing and chatting as they walked, left the school building. However, when she returned home and lay on her bed, looking at the images in a fashionable magazine she bought in the city, her father knocked on the door. "Paloma, please tell me what happened at school," he asked. The girl raised her eyebrows in surprise. "What happened there?" she asked mockingly. "Did someone plant a bomb under the building?" But Senor Cervantes was not in the mood for jokes. "Paloma, I'm serious. The principal just called me. He said there was a conflict between you and the school janitor. Were you sitting on the windowsill with shoes on and throwing chips on the floor?" Paloma felt her ears burning with embarrassment. At the same time, she felt a surge of anger. So, this janitor had complained to the school principal, who then reported everything to her father. Paloma couldn't stand it when someone interfered in her affairs. Even more so, she hated it when her father talked to her as if she were a little girl. If she admitted that the janitor had told the truth, her father would take his side. He had always been for justice. Paloma didn't want to disappoint her father, so she decided to lie. "Dad, that's not true. This janitor wanted to get to know me. He's about my age. He asked for my number, but I didn't give it to him. I told him I didn't have time for dates because I only think about my studies. That's probably why he got mad and said all sorts of nasty things about me to the principal." Frowning, Paloma's father listened carefully to his daughter. "How dare he?" David muttered when the girl finished her story. Paloma made a pleading expression. "I didn't want to talk about it, but they forced me." Her father clenched his fists. "You did everything right, honey. Such things shouldn't be kept silent about. I'll call the principal right away and tell him how it really was. Hopefully, he'll be wise enough to dismiss this scoundrel." Paloma looked guiltily at her father. "Dad, are you sure?" she asked, adding a touch of pity to her voice. "Of course. Such behavior needs to be stopped in its tracks. You did well not to give him your phone number. Another girl might have been more naive. Young people like him have no place in your elite school. Paloma lowered her gaze, hiding behind her long eyelashes. You're right, Daddy. With that, their conversation ended. Mr. Cervantes went to call the school principal. Paloma smiled and silently praised herself. I'm a great actress, she thought. I hope I never see that annoying janitor again. And so it happened. The school principal believed every word of Paloma's father and immediately fired the young man. The girl soon forgot about this fleeting incident, and her life went on. Paloma continued to do what she liked, walking with Selena, going to the movies and concerts, and going on vacations. Moreover, she soon had to decide on her future profession. Her father, who owned a large network of construction companies, wanted Paloma to help him in business. The girl didn't mind, but she didn't want to do management. She was attracted to something more creative, for example, the professions of an architect and a landscape designer. David Cervantes supported his daughter and eventually helped her get into the design faculty of one of the most prestigious universities in the capital. Paloma plunged headlong into student life. She made new friends, but she still regularly met with Selena. The girls still went to cafes and shops together, discussing the latest news with each other. Selena had a wealthy suitor who was 2 years older than her. He worked in her father's company, but the girl wasn't sure about her feelings for him. You're still too young to have serious relationships, Paloma agreed with her. Now is the time to have fun, live carelessly, and not think about the future. You can just enjoy his attentions and gifts. Selena agreed with her friend on everything. They each drank a cup of hot chocolate with orange syrup in their favorite cafe downtown and went to the movies. Years passed, but Paloma and Selena remained unchanged. They continued to spend their father's money and live as they pleased. When it came time to submit their coursework, Paloma would ask one of her admirers from her entourage for help. The girl herself believed that there was no need for her to study particularly hard, as she essentially already had a job. Her dad would take care of everything and ensure that his beloved daughter had everything she desired. So Paloma made it to her final year, with only final exams and defending her thesis left to do. At this very time, troubles began for her father's company. A competitor emerged on the market, threatening to become the best in their field in every aspect. David Cervantes' company started to incur losses, losing clients. With each passing month, the situation slipped further out of control. The competitor was gaining the upper hand in the market. Paloma's father became nervous. He constantly sat in his office, smoking incessantly and talking on the phone with managers. According to all indications, the company was on the brink of collapse. To avoid bankruptcy, urgent action was needed. Selena's father called and said they urgently needed to hold a shareholders' meeting and sell part of the shares to improve their situation even slightly. David agreed, seeing it as the only way out. The meeting was held the same week. A third of the shares were bought by a young man named Antonio Martinez. The company's affairs improved slightly, but the following month, the indicators reached a critical point again. Selena's father suggested to Cervantes that they meet with Martinez, now their business partner, and talk to him. Perhaps he could suggest effective solutions to their problem. David thought it was a good idea and immediately contacted Antonio, who agreed. "Can we come with our families?" David asked. "The thing is, our daughters plan to join the company after they finish university. We'd like them to be informed as well." Antonio Martinez didn't object. However, Paloma took the upcoming trip with a grain of salt. "Dad, you know we were planning glamping this weekend with Selena? It's the coolest event in the world of fashion and beauty, and we can't miss it. All the capital's bloggers will be there." Upon hearing this, her father pursed his lips and crossed his arms over his chest. "Paloma, darling, if we don't figure out how to save the company, you can forget about the word glamping forever. You simply won't have the money for entertainment. Can't you see?" Paloma glanced at her father from beneath her lashes. "How can there be no money?" she asked. "Are you saying we'll go bankrupt?" David simply nodded in response. "But why did you allow this to happen?" the girl erupted. "I thought you knew how to run a business." And Paloma gave her father a disappointed and offended look, which instantly fueled his anger. "How dare you speak to me like that?" he exclaimed in fury. "I let you do whatever you wanted. I never asked what you were spending money on. My money. And now you're even making accusations against me." Paloma looked at her father in astonishment. He had never spoken to her like that before. "There will be no glamping," he declared. "You and Selena are coming with us to meet our business partner. Besides, I'll restrict your access to the credit card. Starting Monday, you're officially joining the workforce." With these words, David Cervantes left his daughter's room, slamming the door loudly. Paloma stared into space for a long time, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Then she threw herself onto the bed and cried. When she calmed down a bit, she picked up the phone and called her friend. "Selena, you won't believe what my dad just did to me. He's decided to make me work." Paloma complained. "My dad said the same thing to me," Selena replied. The girls sighed for a long time about their unfortunate fate, but they understood that they couldn't change anything. Over the weekend, both were ready to go to the office for negotiations. Paloma wore light blue jeans and a white sleeveless shirt. Selena wore a mustard-colored dress, complemented by a fashionable denim vest. Both girls had a bored look on their faces to show their fathers that they disagreed with their decision. However, David and Selena's father paid no attention to their daughters. They were too busy trying to resolve issues with the company, and they had no time for the girls' whims. The men parked at a large business center. When they reached the designated floor, Antonio Martinez was already waiting for them in the lobby. Paloma and Selena exchanged glances. The young man was quite handsome. He had shiny chestnut hair down to his shoulders, lively green eyes, and a pleasant dimple on his right cheek. A short-sleeved shirt of a soft lavender shade and light trousers spoke of a refined sense of style, which the girls immediately appreciated. Antonio smiled charmingly. The men and women entered the spacious conference room and settled around a huge long table. "So, Antonio," David Cervantes addressed the young man, "tell us a bit about yourself." "Yes," Selena's father nodded. "We are very interested to know why you decided to acquire a third of our company's shares during such a challenging period." Antonio cleared his throat and began his story. "All right, but I'll start from the beginning. I grew up in a rather poor family and always dreamed of prosperity. We lived in a tiny apartment where the only luxury item was the television. I watched it every day and often saw you, Señor Cervantes." David raised his eyebrows in surprise, and Antonio, smiling, continued his narrative. "I knew you were one of the richest people in the country, and I dreamed of being like you. You inspired me with your example and motivated me to study. I put in every effort to become the top student in class, and then in the whole school. I hardly went anywhere, didn't play football with other boys, didn't chase after girls. I didn't have time. I spent all my time with textbooks. And my diligence paid off. I was very lucky. I managed to get a scholarship and enroll in university. My parents were very proud of me." They all exchanged glances, admiration evident in their eyes. "Frankly, I didn't think you made yourself," Selena's father said. "Both David and I started with existing capital, and we were supported by our wealthy fathers." Antonio nodded and continued his story. "Yes, but I could only rely on myself. In university, I continued to dedicate myself to my studies, and in the end, I graduated with honors. And I was lucky again. I was hired by a good company where I learned everything I needed to know to start my own business. My business grew rapidly, and I managed to accumulate a decent capital. I bought a new house for my parents, then for myself, and continued to work." "What a hard worker," Paloma suddenly interrupted the man. She quickly grew bored of his story, now focusing on examining her own impeccable manicure. Selena was engrossed in her phone. Paloma, her father, scolded her. "What?" the girl replied. You should listen to how other people live. Not everyone grew up in paradise conditions like you. Well, it's not my fault that everything was always easy for me, Paloma retorted boldly. Selena chuckled. Paloma calmly picked up a glass of water from the table and began drinking through a straw. That's exactly it. But now your carefree life has come to an end, David cut in. Paloma pouted but said nothing. Selena resumed staring at her phone screen. Antonio listened to the argument between the father and daughter with a slight smile. Please forgive us, Senor Martinez, apologized Cervantes. This senorita doesn't always behave properly. Please continue. The young man took a sip of water from his glass and said, When I heard that your company was facing tough times, I attended the shareholders' meeting to buy some shares. I was afraid that if someone else did it, the firm wouldn't be saved. I wouldn't want you to go bankrupt. How noble of you, Paloma couldn't resist interjecting. David shot her a warning look, but she just shrugged. So, do you have an idea to save us from bankruptcy? Selena's father asked hopefully, who had been attentively listening to Antonio's story. The young man nodded and began to lay out his thoughts. I believe you need to hire new specialists to improve the level of service and the quality of the houses you build. Additionally, you need to consider the landscaping, it's currently lacking. You're selling houses but not paying much attention to what surrounds them. David and Selena's father exchanged glances. Yes, you're right about that, agreed Senor Cervantes. When we didn't have strong competitors, customers bought our houses like hotcakes. They were fine with the rough finish, and they were even willing to remove construction debris themselves. But now everything has changed. That's the point, Senor Cervantes. I don't mean to criticize, but the fact that you take on all the chores, including repairs and landscaping, shows your respect for the customer. Senor Cervantes bowed his head. Yes, I never thought of it that way. Selena's father nodded in agreement with his friend. Could you handle finding new staff? Senor Cervantes asked, snapping out of his reverie. Antonio nodded eagerly. I suggest hiring a new landscape designer first. We need someone with experience and an excellent portfolio. Also, they should be popular among the affluent. That would be a huge advantage. David Cervantes stroked his beard. Do you have someone in mind? Paloma snorted. I hope it's not me, she muttered. Selena laughed. You haven't earned all those laurels yet, she said. I have a good friend who has the relevant experience, Antonio replied. Can we rely on him? Selena's father cautiously asked. I wouldn't want him to be poached by competitors in a couple of months. Antonio nodded confidently. We've known each other since childhood. We went to school together. He's also from a humble family, but he's achieved heights through hard work, talent, and diligence. He won't let us down. David Cervantes nodded approvingly. Excellent. Get in touch with him as soon as possible. Saying this, the man turned to his daughter. And you, Paloma, be prepared to intern with him. The girl spluttered, spilling water on herself. What? I've already said that your carelessness and laziness have come to an end. You start working on Monday. What about my diploma? Paloma asked gloomily, realizing arguing with her father was futile. I'll buy it. Anyway, you haven't learned anything. So, you'll do everything our new designer says and learn from him. Paloma rolled her eyes demonstratively. Selena looked at her sympathetically. And what will Selena do? Paloma perked up, catching her friend's gaze. Don't worry, there will be work for her too, Senor Cervantes replied, looking at his friend. Selena's father nodded in agreement. It's time to enter adulthood, girls, he said wisely. Antonio smiled upon hearing those words. He looked at the two girls as if they were foolish children. They understand nothing about life, he thought. Spoiled daughters of wealthy fathers. They're in for a rude awakening. Martinez was right. Sitting at a large table in the high-rise building of the business center, Paloma didn't even imagine what she would soon have to go through. On Monday, the girl, dressed in a light suit and a bright orange blouse, arrived at her father's company office. The young man at the reception desk asked her to show her documents, as the girl had been here only once or twice before. Paloma was outraged, but there was nothing she could do. She had to take out her documents and show them to the young man. He nodded, slightly embarrassed when he realized she was the owner's daughter, and escorted her to the elevators. "You need to go up to the 8th floor and wait in room number 54. But my father said today you would simply show me around the main office and then I could go home. I've scheduled a facial massage." Upon hearing this, the young man shook his head. "The thing is, about 15 minutes before you arrived, a young associate of your father called." "Antonio Martinez? How inconvenient." Paloma impatiently interrupted the young man. "What did he say?" The young man took a breath. He wasn't used to such energy pressure coming from the girl. "Senor Martinez said that the new landscape designer is ready to start his duties today. He will be here in half an hour. I called your father because he instructed me to inform him of the new specialist's arrival." Paloma couldn't bear it and groaned. "And my father told me to wait," she finished the thought of the young administrator. He lowered his gaze and nodded awkwardly. "I'm sorry, but that's Senor Cervantes's order." Paloma almost growled in response. She waved her hand, releasing the young man, and called for the elevator. The young man sighed and hastily retreated, wiping the sweat from his forehead as he went. Paloma entered the spacious elevator and looked at herself in the mirror. Then she took out her phone from her small purse, took a photo, and uploaded it to her page. Then she walked leisurely down the corridor and, noticing room number 54, opened the door. Inside, as expected, it was empty. Paloma entered, threw her purse on the glass table, and sank into the white swivel chair. The windows occupied the entire wall, and Paloma noted the beautiful view from the office. The clock on the wall indicated that there were still at least 20 minutes before the designer arrived. Paloma decided to have a little photo shoot. She placed a chair by the window, took off her light jacket, leaving herself in the orange blouse, and unbuttoned a couple of buttons for a better effect, then began taking pictures. She was so engrossed that she didn't hear someone enter the room. It was a tall young man with dark wavy hair and light blue eyes. He wore simple jeans and a t-shirt of a pleasant pistachio color. He watched the girl with interest for a while, then cleared his throat. Paloma startled and quickly buttoned up her blouse. "I see you didn't miss me too much while waiting," the man said, sitting in the chair opposite the glass table. Paloma quickly took her phone from him and put it in her purse. "I thought you were still on your way," she said, embarrassed, not looking up. "I was lucky. There were no traffic jams on the road," the man replied. Paloma finally dared to look at him. He looked about her age, perhaps a couple of years older. For a moment, he even seemed familiar to her, but no matter how hard she strained her memory, she couldn't recall where she had seen him. The young man looked at her with a slightly mocking gaze, not averting his eyes. Paloma was the first to break it. "Why is he staring at me like that?" she thought. "Allow me to introduce myself," the man said in the meantime. "My name is Ricardo Alvarez, and I'm a landscape designer." "I'm Paloma Cervantes," the girl replied challengingly. "The owner's daughter of this company. At the end of the month, I'll graduate as a landscape designer and become your full-fledged colleague." Ricardo smiled wryly but said nothing. The company recently started working on a new project. It's planned to be a large complex with townhouses and separate cottages. We'll have to plan, arrange, and landscape the backyard area. I think there will be a fountain and a pool, which we need to consider in the project. Paloma pretended to listen attentively to the young designer, but her thoughts were racing like wild antelopes. Firstly, she needed to call the masseuse and tell her she wouldn't be coming. Secondly, the feeling that she knew Ricardo intensified with each passing minute. His blue eyes, sparkling with playful sparks, clearly asked, "Do you really not remember me?" Paloma strained her memory as much as she could, but nothing worthwhile came to mind. What if it's one of Selena's ex-boyfriends? She'll be surprised, the girl thought. Maybe I should ask him directly? But what if I'm wrong, and it sounds very awkward? And I still have to work with him. Lost in her thoughts, Paloma didn't hear Ricardo ask her a question. Sorry, what? Paloma asked again. Did your university have internships? Did you go to real sites? Ricardo repeated. Paloma tried to remember. Yes, there was something like that, but she never went anywhere, citing a cold. One of her father's friends, their family doctor, helped her with the certificates, which Paloma shamelessly brought to the dean's office. There she claimed she would arrange with her father and go to one of the company's sites privately. Then the girl simply bought ready-made projects on the labor market and passed them off as her own. Why dirty her hands? Ricardo patiently waited for an answer. He already understood that the girl was lost in her thoughts and didn't rush her. Finally, Paloma decided that it was best to continue the long tradition of lying to save herself. Of course, there were internships at the university. It's the best educational institution in the capital. And I successfully completed them, she said. Ricardo nodded satisfactorily and stood up from his chair. Then you have enough experience, and we can start working today. I suggest we head to the site right now, the man said, glancing at her shoes. Paloma lowered her gaze. She was wearing her favorite light-colored high-heeled sandals. Okay, she agreed, thinking that assessing the scope of work would be useful. They left the office, went down in the elevator, and headed to the parking lot. Ricardo pointed to a large black Jeep with his palm and opened the door for Paloma. She got into the car, and the man circled around the vehicle and sat behind the wheel. He punched the address of the site into the navigator, left the parking lot, and gradually accelerated, heading up the road. Paloma stared straight ahead. How's your best friend doing? The one you went to school with? Ricardo unexpectedly asked. Paloma jumped. So, I was right. He really is one of her exes. And he's quite handsome. I knew Selena had good taste. She turned to the man and replied with an understanding smile, she's doing great. She's also about to start working at the company. You will probably meet her at the main office. Paloma expected some kind of reaction, but none came. Instead, the man turned on the music. It seemed very pleasant to Paloma, and she relaxed a bit. He probably doesn't want to show that he still has feelings for Selena, she decided to herself. The road led them out of the city. The site was in the midst of nature. The car drove along the river, and Paloma involuntarily admired the beautiful view outside the car window. She suddenly wished this road would never end. Thanks to the music and the faint scent of the man's cologne in the car, there was a pleasant and relaxed atmosphere in the cabin. However, soon the car turned off the highway onto a narrow dirt road and finally stopped at a fence made of fine mesh. Paloma noticed the gates with the company's banner hanging on them. Ricardo pressed the signal, and the gates slowly opened. The car entered the premises, and the man turned off the engine. We're here, he said cheerfully. Paloma nodded silently and got out of the car. Ricardo took a transparent folder with printed sheets from the back seat. Apparently, it was a preliminary project plan. The area was very dusty, with bulldozers working everywhere. The man nodded towards the completed houses and headed towards them across the gravel-strewn ground. Paloma stopped, looking sadly at her light-colored sandals. Señorita Cervantes, please don't lag behind, Ricardo exclaimed, turning around. But look at my shoes, the girl pleaded. They'll be hopelessly ruined. This time the man didn't turn around. Next time, wear shoes more suited to your work. Did you even come to work in heels? Paloma felt a hint of sarcasm in Ricardo's voice. She clenched her teeth in anger. I'll complain to father, she wanted to shout, but then remembered he wasn't on her side anymore. With a heavy heart, she cautiously followed the man. He intentionally quickened his pace, and Paloma fell hopelessly behind. She eventually reached the completed cottages where asphalt paths had already been laid. Breathing a sigh of relief, she walked along one of them, inspecting her shoes on the way. They seemed intact. Passing through a narrow passage between two houses, Paloma found herself at the edge of a large expanse of bare earth, already leveled for planting. "Here's the front of our work," Ricardo said contentedly, looking at the plan. Paloma stood beside him, praying he would decide to start tomorrow. But the man looked up and said they could start right away. With these words, he disappeared somewhere and returned with a bucket, a shovel, and a pair of gloves. "This is for you, señorita," he said, flashing a hint of blue in his eyes at her. "What? A shovel? But don't designers dig anything themselves? Don't they just create projects on the computer?" "That's correct, but it never hurts to work outdoors," Ricardo replied with a smile. "I want you to dig some holes for future trees over there. And closer to the center, make a row of smaller holes. That's where we'll plant flowers." Paloma raised her eyebrows in astonishment. "Did I hear correctly? I have to dig?" Ricardo smiled again, and Paloma felt she had never seen a more venomous smile in her life. "But look at my clothes. They're designer, you know. You have no idea how much they cost. If I ruin them, so what?" Ricardo replied calmly. "Will you complain to Daddy?" Paloma nearly choked with indignation. "How dare you? I've never complained to anyone in my life." Well, Ricardo said dismissively, turning away from the girl. His whole demeanor suggested he had no intention of arguing further. Paloma, visibly annoyed, grabbed the bucket and shovel and went where the man had indicated. There she threw the bucket on the ground, struggled to put on the unruly gloves, and began to dig. She did it very clumsily. Her heels sank into the damp earth, which clung to her fingers and feet. Paloma was horrified. "My pedicure! Nothing will save it now," screamed everything inside her. But Paloma stubbornly dug, ignoring Ricardo. Meanwhile, he watched her closely, hands on hips. His face expressed arrogance and contempt. "What have I done to him?" poor Paloma thought to herself. "It's his ex-Selena, not me." The girl watched with longing as her light-colored pants became stained with brown spots. "I'll have to throw them away now, along with the sandals," Paloma thought to herself. She almost cried. After digging 3 holes, she paused to catch her breath. Her back ached, sweat dripped from her forehead. Her hair kept getting in her eyes, but Paloma didn't want to touch them with her dusty gloves. She breathed heavily and struggled for air. Ricardo remained in his usual spot. "I hope he's not coming up with another task for me. What if he suddenly decides to have me dig the pool with my own hands?" The sun was getting hotter, and Paloma was already drenched. Her orange blouse clung to her body. She dreaded how awful she must look now. Finally, the pits were ready. Paloma looked up to announce it to Ricardo, but he was nowhere to be found. Cursing everything, she went to look for him. The workers looked at her strangely, but Paloma paid no attention to them. Not finding Ricardo, she decided to go to the gate. Perhaps he was waiting for her in the car. Her disappointment was immense when she saw that the man's black car was gone. The sun was scorching. Paloma felt desperate and terribly thirsty. She realized she had left her purse with her phone in Ricardo's car. "Where on earth did he disappear to?" the girl exclaimed in despair. The workers just shrugged. "At least let me make a call," Paloma somewhat impolitely asked, and one of the workers graciously approached her and handed her a basic push-button phone. Suddenly, she realized she didn't know any numbers by heart. Fortunately, the worker had the administrator's numbers saved in his contacts, and Paloma managed to reach them. She explained the situation, and the young man promised to send someone for her. "Wait, Señorita Cervantes," he said before hanging up. And Paloma waited. The sun was merciless. She covered her head with a light jacket. One of the workers offered her his water bottle, but Paloma just grimaced in disgust. The man shrugged and continued working. Finally, a service car with a driver approached the gate, and Paloma hurried towards it. "Señorita, you're too dusty," said the elderly driver, seeing her through the window. Paloma angrily opened the door. "And what do you expect me to do? Take a shower in the field?" With these words, she sat in the back seat. "Home," she announced in a commanding tone. The driver shrugged and obeyed. An hour later, Paloma was home, discovering that her keys were also in her purse. Fortunately, there was a maid in the house who let her in. Her father was at work; he always came back late. Paloma had no choice but to head to the bathroom. She eagerly stepped into the shower, brewing plans of revenge in her mind. "When I tell Dad what happened, he'll fire that jerk on the spot," the girl thought maliciously. After scrubbing herself clean, she wrapped herself in a towel and stepped out of the shower. Her body ached, the skin on her shoulders reddened and blistered. Paloma carefully examined herself in the mirror. The time she spent in the sun without sunscreen turned her shoulders into something resembling hot coals. Paloma cursed loudly; she had very delicate skin and never tanned. "I swear, he'll pay for this," she thought of Ricardo. Suddenly, a terrible drowsiness overcame her. She put on a silk robe, lay down on the bed, and immediately fell into a deep sleep. Paloma dreamt of giant plants. They marched towards her like an army, while somewhere in the background, Ricardo's voice could be heard. "Plant these flowers, and you'll be free," he repeated, each time accompanied by a sinister laugh. Paloma woke up in a cold sweat. It was deep night outside the window. She got up, went to the bathroom, and washed her face over the sink. She felt slightly relieved. Her shoulders still ached and burned. Paloma went to her father's room and knocked on the door. No one answered. She knocked harder. Snoring could be heard from behind the door. Her father was sound asleep. "All right, I'll talk to him tomorrow," Paloma decided. She wanted to call Selena, but remembered that her phone was with Ricardo. "Jerk," she mentally cursed the man and returned to bed. The next morning, Paloma woke up at 10. "Dad's already gone," she thought. "He always left the house at 7 in the morning." Her body ached, and she didn't feel like getting out of bed. She lay in bed until noon, then struggled to the bathroom and, after taking a cool shower, put on her usual jeans and t-shirt. She slipped on some old sneakers. In this attire, Paloma went down to the kitchen, made toast and cocoa, had a snack, grabbed her spare keys, left the house, and caught a taxi to the main office. She needed to meet Ricardo and retrieve her purse. Then Paloma planned to contact her father and strongly request that the man be fired. Afterwards, "I'll complain to Selena about her ex," the girl told herself. "Let her deal with him herself. I don't need to get involved." At the office, they told Paloma that the landscape designer was in his office. She took the elevator to the 8th floor and, without knocking, opened the familiar door with the number 54. Ricardo was sitting at the table, leaning over the scattered sheets of paper. He was clearly engrossed in his work, so he flinched when he heard Paloma's angry voice. "Where's my purse?" she asked without preamble. Ricardo looked so flustered that Paloma suddenly felt sorry for him for a moment. But he quickly composed himself and stood up. "Which one?" he calmly clarified. "The white one I left in your car yesterday." Ricardo ran his hand through his hair. "It's at the site. I had to leave urgently, and I thought you might need the purse." "What? You left it there?" Paloma couldn't believe her ears. "So what? We were supposed to go back there today at 9. But you didn't show up for work on time." "I was in pain," protested Paloma. "Thanks to you, I got sunburned yesterday. How could you leave me there alone without a car?" Ricardo looked innocently at the girl. "It was an urgent matter," he shrugged. Paloma suddenly felt tears welling up in her throat. "Why do you hate me so much? From the very first meeting. What have I done to you? If you've had a bad experience with Selena, and she treated you poorly, that's not my fault at all." Ricardo calmly looked at the girl, fiddling with the papers on the table. Selena has nothing to do with this. Then why did you mention her yesterday? And how do you even know her? Ricardo smirked. I barely know her. I only talked to her once, and she didn't even answer me. She's just as arrogant as you are. Paloma didn't understand anything. Who was this man? Ricardo smiled, and Paloma felt bitterness in his gaze. Indeed, unlike you, she never called me a poor servant. Paloma raised her eyebrows in surprise, starting to remember. A poor servant? So, this Ricardo was. Paloma froze in place from a sudden recollection. He was a janitor at her school. So it's you, she whispered. Yes, it's me, Ricardo admitted. And you never thought that a poor janitor could achieve something in life, did you? In these words of the man, there was so much resentment that Paloma suddenly felt ashamed for the first time in her life. She let her hands fall limply, not knowing what to say. At that moment, there was a knock on the office door. Come in, exclaimed Ricardo. The door opened, and David Cervantes entered the room. Seeing Paloma, he smiled pleasantly. Good to see you in the office, daughter, he said, shaking Ricardo's hand. So, how are things going? The young people exchanged glances. Paloma felt that Ricardo was ready to hear accusations and complaints against him, but she didn't want to talk about yesterday anymore. Everything is fine, she said quietly. Yesterday, Ricardo and I went to the site and saw everything in person, and today we're working on the project. David nodded approvingly. That's wonderful, he said. Keep up the good work. I hope Ricardo can endure your character and won't run away from us in a week. With these words, Senor Cervantes winked kindly at Ricardo and disappeared behind the door. Ricardo and Paloma were alone again, and an awkward pause filled the room. I'll take you to the site so you can get your bag, Ricardo said quietly, and Paloma nodded in response. Like yesterday, they left the office, descended downstairs, and got into the young man's black car. Both remained silent. Ricardo again played his favorite music, and Paloma caught the same feeling of calm and tranquility she had felt on their first trip. She even dozed off for a while. When she opened her eyes, they were in front of the familiar gates. Stay here, Ricardo said to Paloma. I'll bring your bag. With these words, he got out of the car and disappeared behind the gates. A few minutes later, he returned with the bag in his hands. Fortunately, it looked just as white as it did before the unfortunate trip. Paloma breathed a sigh of relief. Ricardo opened the door on her side and handed her the bag. She opened it and was relieved to see that everything was in place. Ricardo got behind the wheel and drove Paloma back. I understand your feelings, she said. You wanted to teach me a lesson, and you succeeded. Ricardo nodded. It turned out that fate brought us together, and now we're working on the same project. I think we should forget past grievances and forgive each other. For a moment, he took his eyes off the road and looked at Paloma. I agree with you, he said. I really regret that your skin got burned in the sun, and I didn't mean to steal your bag. That's why I left it at the site. Now I feel like a fool. The workers could have found it. Paloma nodded. Fortunately, everything turned out okay, and my things returned to me. I don't hold any grudges against you anymore. I hope you'll forgive my arrogance and conceit too. Ricardo nodded gratefully. Of course, he replied. Let's leave everything in the past. They were silent for a moment, then Ricardo looked at Paloma again. Paloma, let me make it up to you. I'd like to invite you to a restaurant. We can discuss the project there. Paloma was very surprised and was about to refuse. Going to a restaurant with Ricardo would be the height of foolishness. But unexpectedly for herself, she suddenly said yes. Over several months of intense collaboration on the project, Paloma and Ricardo became inseparable companions. Initially starting with antipathy towards each other, they quickly discovered that their differences complemented each other, and a common goal brought them together. Paloma marveled at Ricardo's intellect and resourcefulness, how he could see solutions where she only saw obstacles. Ricardo, in turn, admired Paloma's energy and determination, her ability to inspire and motivate. With each passing day, they got to know each other better. Conversations at the work table transitioned into personal discussions about dreams, goals, and ideals. They found they had much in common, shared interests, outlooks on life, and even a similar sense of humor. One evening, while working late on the project, they stepped outside to get some fresh air. The starry sky stretched above them, and in the quiet of the street, they paused, savoring the moment. "Paloma, have you ever thought about what might happen after we finish the project?" Ricardo asked, gazing into her eyes. Paloma turned her face to him and smiled. "I've thought about us possibly going our separate ways, but honestly, I'd prefer it if our paths didn't diverge," she admitted. Ricardo took her hand in his. "I feel like we have everything to make that possible. We work well together, we understand each other." Paloma nodded. "Yes, there's something special between us," she agreed. "Maybe we're not just business partners?" Ricardo smiled, leaned in, and gently kissed her. "Let's find out what happens next," he said. Together. Their lips met again in a kiss, and the stars bore witness to the beginning of a new, romantic chapter in their story. Dear viewers, if you enjoyed the story, please support the video by liking it and leaving a comment. Thank you very much.